This week on the podcast, we're talking about the 4 pillars of leadership and social influence: building trust, encouraging creativity, recognizing accomplishments, and inspiring a collective vision. How do you navigate change? It's a question we think about often, and one that today's world expects us to be comfortable with. The challenge, however, is where do you begin, and how do you develop the mindset and skills to be successful? You're listening to Designing Schools, and I'm your host, Dr. Sabba Kidwai, educator, researcher, and storyteller. Join me each week for stories and strategies that bridge the gap between research and practice, as together we explore how might we design schools. If you know me now, you would never believe that there was once a time that I was really skeptical about the role of social media. I was one of the last in my friends group to get a smartphone. I used to hate when people sat around at parties playing words with friends, and it wasn't until 2012 that I experienced what it's like to be illiterate. In 2011, I began leading a one-to-one iPad rollout at the K-12 school that I was at. That year, they also sent us to the Q conference, where the ideas and people I met would absolutely change the way that I thought about teaching and learning, and quite honestly, changed my life. It's probably a story for another episode, but there were 2 really big takeaways I had from that conference. Number 1, you can be a teacher and a speaker. Truthfully, it's just not an avenue that they talked about much in our credential program. And I just didn't really know anybody or any other teachers I was teaching with that were also speaking and doing all these other kinds of different things. And the second big takeaway I had was that there were really powerful education communities being built online. And the second one was kind of interesting to me because how we use and experience things, especially technology in our personal lives, doesn't always translate into the connection to our professional lives. Because I remember I was part of so many communities online, yet they weren't related to teaching and learning. So I had just never really thought to join one about education. The following year, after coming back from the Q conference, I decided to apply and speak for the first time at one of my favorite conferences, the EdTech Teacher iPad Summit. I was accepted and I got a notification on Twitter where I was barely active. I had an account, but barely used it. And it read, #FF, looking forward to hearing these speakers. And then there was like a list of people who were tagged. And I had no idea how to respond. And I wanted to respond to show that I saw it and I was participating. And I just didn't know how. And so, of course, Google came to the rescue. And I ultimately figured it out. #FF, if you're not familiar, means Follow Friday. So it's a tradition on Twitter and sometimes other platforms where people will highlight each week people they've worked with, just, spotlighting different people for others to learn from. So the conference was spotlighting people who were going to be presenting at their conference. And it was just a really powerful learning moment for me. How could I be leading a technology initiative talking about the future of teaching and learning if I myself didn't even have exposure or experience to the existing and emerging trends? And I was thinking about this about a couple weeks ago, that it's been a decade now since I've had a professional online presence. I started in 2012. It's now 2022. And so I really want to go back to one of the most important trends that I've noticed, and that is how we can use social media to build trust. Now, you've probably heard this quote from Simon Sinek. People don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. And what you do simply proves what you believe. Sharing your story, sharing your values, sharing your ideas allows people to see what you do and proves what you believe. That vulnerability in sharing allows you to build trust with others in your community. This week, I'm sharing reflections from leaders on their journey with leadership and social influence. We begin with our first guest of the season, Superintendent Jerry Almendarez.
I learned very quickly that if you're not in those spaces, then you're going to be left behind. But everything you mentioned, all of those emotions are very real. And it was real for me. And I remember when a good friend of mine invited me to be a part of Clubhouse, I downloaded the app, and my first phase was curiosity. What is this? I'm too old to be here was the first thought in my mind. And so as I started to explore and as I started to listen and get a better understanding of that platform, I took the next step with a little bit of encouragement, and that was to begin to participate, begin to raise your hand and begin to ask questions. And if called upon, begin to accept those invitations and go to the stage and participate in the conversation. And at first, I was very nervous because you're right. Here's a superintendent of a large urban district. It's a public platform. And what are people going to think if I say the wrong thing or if I make the wrong comments? And over time, you just have to trust yourself. You have to take that first leap of faith, get into that space and realize that it's a vulnerable space to be. And as school leaders, we need to be. As educational leaders, we need to model that vulnerability if we're going to move forward. And so the people that are in this space are very like-minded people and make people like me feel really comfortable as I begin to my first series of navigating that space. And then the more I did it, the more comfortable I got. And now I don't have a problem raising my hand, contributing to a conversation, and or even holding a discussion myself with my colleagues.
We've all had those moments of uncertainty. As Jerry shares, the first step is curiosity. It's listening, it's observing, it's when you're ready, then you participate. I would never have known Jerry and the incredible work happening in the Santa Ana Unified School District if it wasn't for him sharing on social media. Jerry has also been an incredible mentor to me, opening up so many different opportunities. Over the past decade, having an online presence as a professional has completely changed the trajectory of my career through the relationships that I've built that have opened doors to opportunities that I otherwise never would have known existed. If you had told me when I was going through my credential program or I was thinking about becoming a teacher that I would one day be a consultant for EdTech teacher, that I would one day be an education executive at Apple, that I would one day have been director of innovative learning at the University of Southern California, or that I would one day be facing many, many layoffs as a new graduate, I never would have believed you. Having a trusted network online who synthesize information from you, who ask you questions, who you can ask questions to, who share current trends is absolutely invaluable in helping you make connections to your own industry. I often see so many people that want to pivot careers, change directions, just try new things or start a side hustle, but don't always know where to start. Today, later in this episode, I'm going to be sharing a masterclass that I'm going to be teaching alongside Michael Hernandez about leadership and social influence and how you can begin building this as well. I can say without a doubt that I would not be where I am today without my social media presence as a professional. I want to take you next to Zandra Jo Galvan. She's the superintendent of Greenfield Union School District, and she shares how having a network is your circle of influence there to support you and encourage you through every single moment of navigating change.
Whatever the circle is, everybody needs a circle. And that's how you navigate through what's coming in 2022, no matter what. I know I have people that I can lean on for support, so that is half the battle. When you feel that you're alone in anything, you're done. Perspective is everything. And if your perspective tells you that you cannot do it, you're done. You're done. But if your influence tells you you can, you're ready.
We all need those circles that Zandra mentioned. It's those small interactions, that one DM, that one online or offline piece of encouragement or support that reminds us we can do this, that our voice matters and that our work matters. This type of circle is made up of people who are often not in proximity to you. Leadership in general can feel lonely. Leading change can feel even lonelier. When leading change, it can often feel as if you're in the minority. And while that may be true within your organization, there's millions of other people around the world who feel the exact same way you do across all industries. Social media breaks down so many of the barriers, allowing us to connect, watch, and share and learn with one another, reminding us all that we are not alone, giving us the confidence and courage to show up each and every day, being the change we wish to see. For the first time in 2015, the World Economic Forum highlighted leadership and social influence as a trending skill. It's appeared on their list every year since then, alongside complex problem solving, creativity, active learning, innovation, and many more. At first glance, it might not seem obvious, but all of these skills are interconnected. There's one question that I've asked every single guest this season. What does the relationship between leadership and social influence mean to you? While everyone shared different stories and examples, there was one unanimous theme. Leadership and social influence is about building and nurturing relationships. I use 4 pillars to guide how we think about building these relationships through leadership and social influence. Number 1, building trust. 2, encouraging creativity. 3, recognizing accomplishments, all of which allow us to do number 4, inspire a collective vision. Let's go back to Superintendent Jerry Almendarez on how leaders use social influence to build trust and recognize accomplishments. Jerry was our first guest of the season and shared how it allowed people to learn who he was, but also opened the door to opportunities for people to advance into new roles within and beyond his district.
So when I get here, the first couple of days, I'm meeting staff and I walk around. I come into my office and I sit down with my ladies in my office and I say, okay, being new to this district, I'm going to need some help. Is there anybody that can help me with my social media platforms? And immediately Lynette raised her hand and said, I'll do it. And so I sat with her and worked with her, and she would come with me to various school site visits, and she would take video and take pictures and stuff like that, and really spent the next couple of weeks just really getting to know me, my personality, my thought process. And so over time, as we began to continue working together, she developed all of these various ways, these different platforms, and this brand ambassador that she felt reflected my value system as a superintendent of this district, and began to find ways to pull other people in to replicate that unilaterally across the district. And so it was extra duty over what her desk was, but she embraced it and then found out that it was a lot of work and went to a training and decided to heard about this ambassador program, and then took it upon herself to actually replicate the work that she did across the district with 80 brand ambassadors. And it was voluntary. So she sent out an email from the superintendent's office saying, if anybody is interested in doing what we're doing, here's a training session where we're going to bring you in. We're going to tell you what it's all about, and then build your capacity so you'll be able to do it independently. As a result of that, she was gaining the confidence in her skill set and noticing that the value she was bringing to the superintendent's office was something unique, and decided that, with help from me, decided to encourage her to participate and to present at a couple of conferences. And like me, when I joined the Clubhouse platform, she was nervous and reluctant at first, but she took the leap and she is now a natural. And so she's presented at a couple of conferences, and, I don't see her stopping there.
What I love most about this story that Jerry shares is that it challenges our thinking of leadership. Jerry was the superintendent and Lynette was his executive assistant. The one thing they both shared in common, passion and initiative for sharing the story of people and the work that was happening in their district. It's a reminder that leadership and social influence is not reserved for people with formal titles. In an upcoming episode, I'm actually interviewing the custodial and building services team at Santa Ana and how they've been using social media to build influence and share their leadership and share their story. What this requires is initiative, curiosity, vulnerability, and collaboration. It reminds me of the interview I did with Tony Richardson, the vice principal at MLK STEAM Academy. When I think of Tony, I think of a resilient leader. He's someone who, ever since he began his education career, was an advocate for the values and change he believed in, regardless of the title that he held.
I love not only, I also shared a lot when I was in CNI. I shared a lot when I was in the ELP. It's the thing I think I love about social media. To me, I love celebrating the accomplishments of my team. And I love just sharing kind of the exciting work we're doing with students. And I think the value specifically at MLK and sharing the experiences that we have there is I hope those can be replicated at other sites. And I hope too that they can connect with teachers at my school and say like, hey, I saw you did this. Like, how did you do that? And it's just kind of celebrating, like I said, the accomplishments of my teachers, my team, the amazing things they do with kids every day. And I really like to use it as kind of a platform for that. And then secondary to that, I love the connections that are made on social media. Clearly, like you and I, right, I've talked a lot through social media. I love getting ideas from other educators on social media. I think my teachers love getting other ideas on social media. And so I think the power of using it as a professional tool and the effort of professional growth helps kind of grow the group, if you will, that you can collaborate with, right? From a small scale district level, even to a global level. So.
I love how Tony shares that it's not just the value he gets from being connected to others, it's how he can share the incredible work that's happening within his district. Oprah shares how after interviewing over 30,000 people, she recognized a pattern. She said at the end of each interview, people would ask her, whether it was an inmate in prison or a famous celebrity, everyone asked her the same question. Was that okay? I know I do it too after interviews. Her conclusion was that everyone wanted validation. Not the ego-stroking kind, like, oh my God, you were amazing. She said people wanted validation that what they shared mattered. It's why I learned, and why we all know, that cultures of innovation, where we want people to take risks and be creative, begin with empathy. They begin with listening to people's fears, their motivations, their skepticism, and letting them know that they were seen and heard. This, Oprah says, is how we build connection amongst change and conflict. Tony talks about teacher trauma and how he as a leader had to rebuild trust with his team and why social media helped him in doing so.
We had a lot of teachers that came with everything from maybe they just did not get along well with their site admin for whatever reason. And I'm not knocking either party. It's just sometimes not a great fit, right? For a variety of reasons. Some people want really strong leaders that are going to tell them what to do every minute of every day. Some people want like that kind of creative freedom or no structure at all, right? It's just different, varying kind of things. I think a lot of people had trauma with like classroom walkthroughs and things. I think a lot of people were very nervous that if they weren't doing what their previous site administrator like perceived that they needed to be doing at that time or pushing the initiative that they were pushing, like there would be punitive measures kind of taken, or they would be called to an office and talked to, or an email would be sent. And that was a lot of the like specific things that I would see. And again, I'm not trying to knock any, like I'm not there. I'm not at the school. I have no idea what's happening. So it is what it is. I'm just going off of what I was told. And so that was a lot of the trauma that I saw. And I think there was a lot of trauma with the way they were trusted. I think a lot of people were moved around a lot. So they never felt like they could like get really solid with a particular grade level. Those were a lot of the kind of teacher traumas. And I saw a lot of people too that wanted to come here because they wanted to kind of like reignite the spark, that you will, for why they fell in love with education and fell in love with working with kids. And they wanted a new opportunity. And it wasn't the allure of like, oh, it's a new building or new this or new that, because it's in a super tough area. It's in a tough part of town. But I think everybody saw like the idea of like, I think this is what I need. I need that kind of new spark and that new energy, and I'm ready to get back in there. And that's one thing I'm proud of too. Like I have brand new teachers, I have very veteran teachers, but when you talk to them, like it's the same level of excitement about what they're doing. And I think that's something I'm really proud of too.
I love how Tony shares that people saw what we believed in, what we were doing, and wanted to come and reignite their own spark and their own passion for teaching. This isn't just true for educators, it's true for students as well. I interviewed Professor Williams a few weeks ago, who was inspired by the research on creating videos and shared those with her classes and on her social media feeds. I personally have been really inspired by watching Denise. She, during a time where many people fell back on outdated practices, really went above and beyond to do simple things that made a significant impact in the relationships she was nurturing with her students through online learning. She also shares many of these videos on her social feeds, which is again, how I've come to learn about her work. Here's Denise sharing the impact this had on the relationships that she cultivates with her students.
I think it was a combination of seeing other people do videos, but also reading the research and realizing how important it is for students to know that I'm a real human being. And this was whether I was teaching online or whether I was teaching in person well before COVID. That an introductory video and putting a face, a human face in all of our like silliness and normalness and regular lives to a professor makes a huge difference before the class even begins to students feeling like I'm going to be welcomed, that I belong here, that my professor is a real person who will care about me. And when I first started making them, it was so funny because I would send like an email or something and you kind of hope that students read them or no. But then I would post something and then it would be like 2 minutes later, all these views or people messaging me or commenting and realizing that that's where the engagement was happening, that I was reaching students much more quickly through my videos. And now it's really funny. I posted something last week and shared it. And then I heard from a student from like 3 years ago. It was like, hey, professor, how's it going? And then another student was like, I remember you. And so this ongoing connection, I just think it's a really wonderful community that forms through being able to share those. And I have gotten really past this idea that the videos have to be perfect, because the first thing people say to me is like, I don't have the time to do that. And I do not exaggerate when I say it. I spend like 5 minutes on a video because I just do it. Unless something really disastrous happens, it's a one-take video. I just don't worry about what happens. My dog barks, my son walks by, I look funny, whatever's happening. And I think that those are actually the videos that they get the most views and engagement from my students. So being able to do it quickly and knowing that I'm reaching students, especially now that everything's online for me still, is the number one reason why I do it. It's the only reason why I do it for students.
It's again a powerful reminder how when you share your story, you're not only amplifying the work of people within your organization, you're drawing in talent, opening up the opportunity for us to all be in environments that bring us joy and align with our values. I always share how that was the biggest difference in the type of work I was doing before I was on social media and after. Prior to being on social media, I was really just searching for anyone who would hire me. I'd looking through job boards and I was just looking for anything and everything. Once I began developing an online presence, I have to say after 2012, I never again applied for another position. Instead, I was meeting people, I was building relationships that organically opened the door to opportunities because people saw my values, my strengths, my interests, and how it aligned with theirs and what I could bring to the table through the work that I was showcasing. And those jobs have brought me so much more joy and have allowed me to really grow and develop as a professional in so many more ways. I want to take you now to Jeffrey Prickett. He was named the 2021 Illinois High School Principal of the Year. And he shares how relationships are the foundation to building trust.
I have to be very visible amongst staff and kids for people to know me. If they don't know me, how in the world can I expect them to trust me? How in the world can I expect them to follow me? Right? And so it is time. It is building relationships. It is having conversations with people, both professionally and personally. It is checking in with people. It's all that stuff that seems so simple, but listen, I have 2,400 kids here, and that's a mid-sized school according to like Texas, but still, it's still a large system.
We can't be everywhere all the time, don't we know it? Being able to balance in-person relationships, building experiences between offline and online allows us to reach more people, connect with more people, and recognize more people. As I'm recording this, I'm thinking, did I ever even meet the superintendent of my district when I was teaching? Because to be honest, I barely even remember the principal. I definitely remember everybody when I worked in a private school, but it was much smaller. But I don't really have a strong recollection outside of like observations and formal meetings when I was really interacting with them and really getting to know their values and who they were in public school districts. Speaking of time, it's a question that always comes up. How can I add being present on social media to my already overflowing plate? I want to take you back to Zandra. She has a 3-step framework for how she did this and how she balances her time between work, family, and social media.
Flair, because you have to add your own flair, your personal flair to it, through finessing it, because you want to make sure that it's telling a story and it's really fine-tuned and it's really something that people are noticing that has a value. And then frequency. Like, you can't just drop something once on social media and then go away and never come back, because then there's not influence. So the frequency is also important. And it means different things to different audiences. And so my workshop I do is called Communicating and Leading with Flair, Finesse, and Frequency. And so what does that mean? So to me, it's a little different than anyone else. It's my kind of my brand in terms of what I value. And so my core values are people, like totally people, and celebrating people and helping people do good work. And so what I do is every chance I get, I'm capturing a photo of kids, or I'm capturing a photo or a video of team members or of administrators or parents, or what we're doing or what we're celebrating at the time, and sharing that with the world, because it highlights who they are. Two things happen. The first thing that happens is you get your message out there when other people will fill in the blanks. If you don't tell your story, someone else will tell it for you, and it will definitely not be accurate. So you get ahead of it, you tell your story. And the second part that happens is the benefit from those who are highlighted is immense in terms of the gratitude and the appreciation that they receive, because we appreciate them. And so big with labor, big with parents, big with kids. And then the snippets, and they're not long, they're short, but the value of that on social media is definitely something that speaks volumes to celebrating people, which circles back to your relationships, and it circles back to the human value and treating everyone with that kindness that they deserve.
I love that. That is, yeah. And you do such a phenomenal job of that. Tell me how you balance all the different platforms. Is there one that you see as being most significant or most impactful, or because you're everywhere, like everywhere, and the best of ways too, like you just show up with that same energy everywhere. How do you balance the different platforms? And is there one in particular that you like over another?
Oh gosh. And I've been asked this a lot too. And I'm like, first answer is like, I don't know. Like, I'm just wired this way. Because people put things through their own lens, right? And that's all we know. So my first answer is, I'm not sure, but I would venture to say this. I do have some shortcuts, like things that I do when I balance. And so during work time, my calendar is my saving grace. So I color code my calendar and the things that I have to do. I make sure that on the Friday before I leave for the weekend, I'm checking what's happening next week. And then I glance at the following week. So I know I mentally start preparing for what's to come. And so then I start mapping out what I'm going to say, what I'm going to do. And if it's a high influence, like a podcast or something that I have to do an assignment, then I'm already kind of thinking through gradually until it occurs. So those kinds of things happen. The other thing that I really do to balance is my mornings before work is dedicated to fitness. So while everyone is sleeping, I'm up and I'm bouncing around in the living room, doing my exercise routine because of the endorphins it gives me. Like, I'm not going to even lie to you. I've only had this much coffee today. I know. Like, that's it. So I don't need coffee. I like it. I want it. I don't need it. But I get up like this, and the movement and that endorphins that come from it is what powers me through. So crafting out time that works for you. So for me, it works in the morning before, because my days are crazy and they go crazy all the way until like 10 at night. Is really important. So that's like another one of my, what do I do? And then the other one, that's a super trick that I'm going to, share with others too, when I go to the conference here, is at the end of the day, when I'm winding down and I'm reflecting on what I'm doing tomorrow, I set up my social media posts. Like, I set them up already. Like, I know what's happening tomorrow. Guess what's happening tomorrow? Tomorrow, kids are coming back. Oh my God. Like, kids are coming back and I'm so excited, and I'm going to dance. So I'm going to have music and I'm going to have kids fired up, and I'm going to get so excited to receive them because we haven't seen them in a little over 3 weeks. And so I'm already setting up the post.
I hope that framework and the shortcuts that Zandra shares are valuable to you. It brings us to the last pillar of leadership and social influence, inspiring a collective vision. I shared a few weeks ago how when the pandemic struck, there were leaders who had prepared their districts for a rapidly changing world that we live in today. We face an increasingly ambiguous future. Yet one constant is having the mindset and skills to navigate change. It wouldn't really be a podcast with me, would it, if we didn't talk about how design thinking helps you build these mindset and skills. But back to the leaders, there was one thing that I noticed many of them shared in common. They were part of the Future Ready Schools Network. So I invited Tom Murray, the Director of Innovation for Future Ready Schools, onto the podcast a few weeks ago to tell us how leaders inspire this collective vision toward change.
First thing I would say is I see a humility with the leaders that I truly admire. They're sharing their story, but it's not look at me, it's look at our kids. Look what my teachers are doing. And so they share their story out. But the humility also relates to as good as you are, as much success as you've had as a district, there's always things to learn. There's always ways to meet kids' needs better. There's always opportunities to create. And so it's the humility plus the vulnerability to say, we can continue to get better. And as a superintendent, I'm going to lead the way and model the way. It's real easy the higher up you go to close our doors, close our community, and think every cabinet meeting is going to have all the answers for what we need and be totally blind to what's happening on the other side of the highway that are doing great things in different ways. And so I think what I'm seeing from a commonality is these leaders are willing to break down walls, share their stories, offer resources, offer support, offer ideas, because so many times districts get pitted against each other in the newspaper. Well, that score, that graduation rate, whatever it might be, but recognizing how do we get to the point where we care as much about the kids across the highway as we do the kids in front of us, right? And when we can get to the pinnacle of that collaboration and we see superintendents working side by side, sharing things like professional learning, sharing ideas, networking on and working on things like pathways and those kinds of things together to break down traditional space and time barriers, kids win and kids benefit. And so what I see with so many of those leading superintendents is that humility, is that vulnerability, the willingness to share their story, not from this notion that we've arrived, check it off, look how good we are, but to highlight our kids and recognize that. And so I think that community building does go with sharing their own story, but also being vulnerable and recognizing the growth, but also recognizing the community partnerships that can really be a part of it. Some of these districts are just doing amazing things with their businesses, coming from out of California. Look at like linked learning and the things that are happening there. Look at some of the pathway programs that have been developed to really redesign high schools so it's uber relevant for that world. So what's happening is that community building is really building consensus. And then the next time something goes to a vote, they've got a lot more people that understand what's going on, that understand the relevance, that have been part of that process. And so that community building is helping when it comes to referendums and those things as well. It's not the ultimate reason of why you do it. We do it for our kids, but those are some of the side benefits when we make those networks, when we build those networks and make those connections.
No, absolutely. And for people who struggle with that idea, because it's hard, like, being vulnerable, building community, like that is a whole skill set in and of itself. What are some of the fears that you see from people and how do you kind of help them, I guess, navigate overcoming that?
The fear, especially at that level, the superintendent level, is you're always being watched. Every tweet, every post, no matter where you are, you're out to dinner with your family, you're on vacation, no matter where it is, you're always being watched. And so the higher up you go, there's always going to be this notion of some segment that doesn't like you for some reason. You want to minimize that number, but there's no leader out there that's making change that everybody across the way just thinks are the greatest thing on earth, right? And so some of that fear is recognizing, oh, what if I start sharing this out? And what if it's not happening in this one classroom and somebody's calling me hypocritical because, right? And so I think part of the fear that comes down to it is repercussions from their board. Maybe I have a board, even if it's just one board member that's following everything I do on social. And for some reason, they don't want me here. They think to be another superintendent. I start to become pretty hesitant in the things that I'm sharing, just thinking that it's like that overanalyzation paralysis, right? The analysis paralysis, right? Where should I do that? Shouldn't I do it? And I think that's a natural fear because you are, as that leader, a public figurehead in that community. So to me, it's really, we just be intentional about it. Look at every lens, maybe networking with somebody else that you can say, hey, here's what I'm about to post. If I've got a concern, double check it for me. Am I missing something? Am I culturally blind when it comes to this post? Is there something that I need? And having, again, that humility and vulnerability to have somebody willing to check that, to have somebody to build some of those bridges there as well. It's absolutely a real fear when it comes to being that public servant. Doesn't matter if you're talking, somebody in government or you're talking about a school superintendent. And so I think to me, that's probably the biggest one that's out there.
Humility and vulnerability. This brings us full circle to where we started with Jerry, who shared his humility and vulnerability and how it opened up opportunities for not only himself to stay relevant, but also the opportunities for his district. If you know me, you know how important this topic is to me. Sharing our stories, recognizing what people are doing in our organizations, having people feel seen and heard, encouraging creativity, building trust, recognizing accomplishments, but ultimately really building that shared narrative toward change are just a few of the benefits of being a leader who practices social influence. It's a topic that I am asked a lot of questions about, and so I decided to host a workshop. You can reserve your complimentary ticket at designingschools.org, or you can send me a DM and let me know that you want to attend. During our time together, we're going to explore how you, regardless of your position, can use social media to build trust, recognize accomplishments, inspire collective vision, and build an incredible learning network that's going to completely change the way that you see your professions and the opportunities that you have access to. I'm going to be joined by my good friend and colleague, Michael Hernandez. He's worked with Apple, Adobe, Google, National Geographic, and PBS over the past 2 decades to help adults and young people learn the art and craft of storytelling. Michael and I bond over many things, from design thinking to social media, but ultimately, we're both high school teachers. We believe it's so important to start teaching these skills from an early age, teaching students not just how to see social media from a personal lens, but how to leverage it in academic and professional settings as well. We both are testaments to how this can be such a powerful force for bridging the equity divide that exists. While we so often hear that your zip code determines your future, that is no longer true in a world where the internet breaks down barriers. The only difference is, do you know how to leverage the technology you have to get access and exposure to the opportunities that are available to you? From K-12 to higher education, everyone assumes that because technology existed when students were born, that they grew up around devices, they must know how to use them. Quite the contrary. In Digital Natives 10 years after, author Kutropoulos shares that digital natives lack the literacy, information-seeking, and problem-solving skills that they need to take advantage of technological advancements in society. Differentiating between how to leverage social media for personal versus academic and professional outcomes needs to be explicitly taught. In addition, we need to provide young people with the time and space to use these platforms to showcase their skills, their strengths, and their ideas. I often talk about how we did this at the University of California with graduate school students. We started in Seesaw, a safe space, but one of the best things about Seesaw was that it totally mirrored many of the social media platforms out there. And through that, we helped our students build the skills and then transition them to using LinkedIn. Through this, they were able to build social capital, identify mentors and sponsors, and gain exposure to the many unknown jobs and opportunities that we're always talking about. It's your turn to join the conversation by sharing what you enjoyed or what questions you have. In a world where time and attention are so valuable, thank you for choosing to listen and for being a part of our Designing Schools community. Leaving a review for the podcast helps others learn about the show, giving them the gift of knowledge and allowing this community to help create access and exposure to ideas and opportunities others may not even know exist.